Thank you, Anur. So it's recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you want to, and if you can, it would be great if you can turn on your camera. If not, that's also fine. And yeah, welcome to this fifth webinar on to discuss the propositions of the book All In, Revolutionary Theory to Stop Climate Collapse. We'll be discussing today about movement capabilities and a movement capable of system change, and which capabilities do we need, looking at the past, so what lessons can we draw, but also looking at the future, what capabilities do we need to face climate collapse and social collapse now. We did previous webinars on the propositions of the book. So it has 6 propositions. You can watch them on YouTube, but also like on social media in a company. And there will be one more webinar after this one on the 6th and final proposition of the book, which is international coordination for revolutionary rupture movement. So yeah, that's the introduction. Welcome. I'm going to start by introducing myself and then like the speakers briefly, and then I'll do a brief introduction as well on movement capabilities. So I am Matilde. I am an organizer based in Portugal. I've done international work for the past 4 or 5 years. I'm basically mostly in climate justice activism, and in Portugal, I'm an organizer currently in Climaximo, and I'm supporting with the All In project as it takes off from being a book written by 2 people and starts being also a proposition that we implement together on building this ruptural movement together. And yeah, today we have Yotam. Hi, Yotam, welcome. From the US, from New York, based in New York, who has experience being one of the organizers of Occupy Wall Street, so a decade ago, but is currently also a facilitator in the movement in the US in these troubled times. Welcome. And we have also Gabi Mitidieri, who is an organizer based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's part of CEL's organization, but she's also been active in the feminist and LGBTQ plus movement in Buenos Aires. Welcome, Gabi. And we have also João Camargo, who is coming in a few minutes. And he is currently media and communications officer for an MEP in the European Parliament. So theoretically, we could say that we have, let's say, the 3 main capabilities that are talked about in the book, or at least in abstract in here. So we have Yotam, who will be speaking to us from more of a disruptive capability, although of course there's these things sometimes mix up, right? There's also some narrative capability there. We have Gabi, who will speak a lot also from the perspective of the feminists and LGBTQI plus movements in recent years in Argentina, which have been a great example of changing the narrative in a lot of aspects. And we also have João Camargo, who will be talking about the institutional capability, looking into the current composition of the European Parliament and what does that tell us about the institutional capability currently in the movement in Europe. And I think, yeah, João just joined in. Hello, welcome. Yeah, so now I have some slides and I will try to share them. I did this rehearsal in the background. Let's see if it works now. Hi, João, welcome. Sorry, I just need 1 minute. Okay. You can see my slides, right? Yeah, great.
Yes.
I'm not gonna put them on for a long time, but just to give some introduction. Oh, and with us we also have Mariana. Hi, Mariana, which is a co-author of the book, and she'll also be here with us. So yeah, let me just adjust this. Yeah, so we're looking into movements capabilities, and in the book, this is the fifth proposition to choose, also invest in the capabilities and in a coordinated manner as a movement level task. And so the book starts by presenting this framework, which is not original from the book, is adapted from Zeynep Tufekci, Twitter and Tear Gas, author of Twitter and Tear Gas, and she gives us three main movement capabilities. Of course, there are more, but these would be like the principal ones, and the others would come like more as support. So we have narrative, we have disruptive capability, and we also have institutional capability. So just to give a little bit of context and also more of a base that we can all discuss. So narrative capability is basically the ability of telling stories. So like who we are, what the problem is, what is the underlying problem of that problem. So like the structural cause of that problem, where do we want to be, and what should we do then to be there. And the book draws some inspiration from movements such as Me Too, but also Ni Una Menos in Argentina, which change a lot of the narrative around feminicide and around violence against women. Then we have disruptive capability. There's like so many examples, but it's basically the capability of disrupting business as usual as it is, like disrupting like the reproduction of the system. And here I chose, like there's tons of examples, of course. One example that's like pictured here in the slide is Black Lives Matter, specifically in the murder of George Floyd, which was 2020, I believe, in which were like daily demonstrations, and a lot of the population was taking part in these protests that were effectively like disrupting business as usual in the US, and in many cases also spread to a lot of parts of the world. And yeah, then we have as of the third more important, or let's say central capability, we have institutional capability, which is basically the capability of the movement to engage in systematizing demands and consolidating victory. And here, the book gives example, and I also choose for the slides of this, the South African Constitution and of the early 90s. And here also, there's an important part on the need of how do we look at this institutional capability, right? Like, how do we look at these capabilities, and how we must, backed by the previous propositions that we are doing in terms of like what we need is a movement for rupture, a movement for revolution. How can we engage in the institutional capability in a revolutionary way? So in a way that it's not like we are negotiating with the system, aiming at achieving the change by itself per negotiating, but rather like using it as a tool in our revolutionary path. And yeah, just some more notes or last notes. So it's important that we interpret capabilities as like a movement level exercise and not like as an organizational exercise. So this is like a collective, we must think in movement terms. So basically what this means is that not all groups are supposed to be doing like all kinds of things, right? So if we collaborate strategically, we can complement each other's strengths. But there's also something important to remember, which comes from the like previous propositions that the book is doing to the movement and that we are doing to the movement, which is, okay, collaborate with each other, but collaborate for what? And so one important thing to retain here is that capabilities must be used by the revolutionary, by the movement as a party, as part of a common vision, and a common strategy of transformation, which in this case, we are proposing that it needs to be ruptural. So basically, we need to apply, as says in the slide, we need to apply the capabilities framework after we settle the movement vision and the model of transformation. Otherwise, like, we can be doing capabilities that cancel each other out, and we just return to the same problem that the book started by talking, which is like the lack of investing in one strategy and choosing to stick with it, and the need to build this ruptural movement ecology as a whole, this movement as a party that is built and that is envisioned and building together towards one goal, which is rupture. So we need to look at capabilities in this framework and not like isolated from this proposal of building this movement as a party towards a revolutionary rupture with the system. Yeah, and we arrive at this, which gives the motto for the webinar. So this fifth proposition, which is once a movement forms itself in more or less coherent terms, it can analyze its strengths and its weaknesses and channel resources to certain aspects, and that we must be intentional with our resources. And this means that capabilities are these movement level decisions, right? That we can't like choose them by ourselves, by our own organizations. We must like articulate strategically within a common vision and a common strategy, model of transformation of rupture to then analyze these strengths and these weaknesses. So I'm going to stop the slides now. And so this was the introduction, the base for talking about. I don't know if maybe Marianne, if you want to add something to what I said about capabilities. Okay, so now let's listen to our amazing speakers. Yeah, and I'm going to start by maybe asking Yotam. So you were a core organizer of Occupy Wall Street, which had tremendous disruptive as well as narrative, of course, capacity over a decade ago in the very heart of the capitalist global economy. And I think another perspective from your side is also your view as a current movement facilitator in the US, having probably a bit of an overview of the status of the whole movement situation, right? So this puts you in an interesting perspective, because it gives you both direct access to learnings from Occupy, as well as a clear overview on the status of the movement now in 2025. So I guess the question to kick off would be, like in times of Trump and climate collapse, what are the key learnings from Occupy that you think could be useful now to be applied now to build a movement in the US that is able to articulate internally and make strategic choices, for example, on movement capabilities? And looking at the status of the movement currently in the US, which movement level investments do you think need to be done? What capabilities do we need? What's your analysis on this? And I'll pass to you.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. Easy question. So I'll just, just bullet points answers, and then, we could probably leave early. I don't know if I have very satisfying answers, but I think, well, it seems like there's two big questions here, and I can start with one. I mean, I don't know if you want me to do both of them now, but one is lessons from Occupy for this moment. And I've been an organizer since then and have been in many movements since then, but Occupy was a big moment that I, saw close up. So there's lessons from there, and then there's a question of how are we doing now, and what do we need? And they're separate questions. I think, well, do you have a sense of which of those two you want me to start with?
Go ahead, you choose. If you also, we can also come back to it later. So just, yeah, go
on. I could talk about lessons from Occupy for days. So I'll choose the ones that are the juiciest. I think maybe the most related to the questions that are in this book, because maybe then it'll be interesting to talk about them or even debate them. One of the lessons is movements, I think, very rarely choose intentionally what impact they're going to have, which I think is something intriguing to explore in the context of the proposal that we be very intentional about what we do. And what often happens in movement moments like Occupy, but certainly in lots of sort of uprising type moments, um, what often happens is uh, something catches, and that's what spreads. Whatever it is about it that's baked into it at the very beginning, what some people organizers around here have started to call a DNA. Like things often have a sort of like baked in DNA, and for a combination of things that we often can't predict, they pop or they don't pop. And some of the things we can predict are the conditions hard enough, but also have potential? Is the story clear? Is there something that cuts through and is confrontational or whatever? But there's also just luck and timing and things that you can't account for. And often, and so when you look at Occupy, there were a bunch of things that spread, and some of them were awesome and brilliant, and some of them were stupid and absurd and destroyed us, and that's often what happens in mass movement moments, because they are not usually guided in the way that, I don't know, in the way that we would wish they were. And that in some very rare historical examples, they turn out to have been. So I think that's one lesson. And related to that lesson, often what works is uh, kind of like those of us who are sort of like experienced organizers and have been around and have an eye on history and whatever, turn out often to be wrong about what's going to work. And what usually works is what young people in the moment feel in their guts and prove everybody else wrong. That was very much true at Occupy, where I was I was 25 and other people there were 22, and 25 was like, oh, he's like kind of slightly an adult with some experience. And I was like, this is not going to work. We just did a very similar thing, 2 months ago, and it didn't work. And Americans are not going to do are not ready for their like Tahrir Square moment. And like, this is just going to, and then it just, because there were enough people there who were like, didn't know any better and didn't give a shit about anybody else who had experience. And some of that is part of what makes it work. There's another side to that, which is I think very lucky, and this is a lesson that I definitely keep close to me in times like this, where if you look objectively at the conditions and the situation and the writing on the wall, we're not in good shape, obviously. Our movements are mostly not ascendant. Our timeline is very bad. Our enemy is maybe more powerful than any enemy that's ever been in history. And we are facing not just the sort of like normal end times, but like maybe for real end times for the species, So there's like all sorts of ways to look at this and be like, we're fucked. But another lesson from Occupy is you just don't know. You just don't know what's possible. We think we know what's possible. Like I thought I knew what was possible at that time, and it turned out to be wrong. And there's a lot of ways to read that negatively and also ways to read that positively. Our little human brains can't tell what is possible. So those are some like, I don't know, if you want to get more specific about anything, we can, but that's sort of, I don't know, top few lessons that occurred to me in this moment.
Yeah, I think thanks. That's actually pretty interesting. I think some of the things I read your article on despair, by the way. And I think it's also resonating a bit with what you were saying there, that like we really don't know what's possible now. And like yeah, I think that's something that actually gives a lot of let's say revolutionary optimism, at least to me. Maybe something that we could talk about before we pass on like to Gabi or João, because I think Gabi's having some connection problems, would be, you know, like looking, you said it, like there have been plenty of end of times. But this one seems like a pretty big deal end of time. Like it seems like, you know, one that the enemy is pretty powerful. So looking at the movement now, looking at the situation now in the US, and you know, the US is one of the centers of the global capitalist economy. So yeah, looking at the situation there and the movement there, what do you think would be needed? Of course, you might not have all the answers, but we may be curious to hear, like, what do you think would be needed also in terms of movement capability, but, you know, in terms of building movement right now to, yeah, what would it take to do another Occupy right now in the US, in the current situations, the current context? Yeah, I'll be curious to hear from that.
Sure. I mean, again, I think I have only just, one perspective on what's needed. I think a lot is needed. We're generally not as anywhere near as strong as we need to be. But I think the way, first of all, I just want to say, I don't think we need another. I'm not looking for another Occupy Wall Street, although big moments of rupture or confrontation are important and I think are going to be part of any struggle that we have. Um, I'm interested in, I think that one of the things that's interesting to me about the book, I'm interested in something that can both change the common sense around us, which I think in some ways is changing the narrative, and win real things. Win things now that open up the possibility for more winning things later and more winning things and more winning things. And there's something to talk there about reform and non-reformist reforms and whatever else if we want to go down that road. But um, uh, I think the things we're missing here the most are a powerful labor movement and like some version of a party. And I don't know if the party needs to look like the way the party used to look like. I think probably not. But a thing that can coordinate and negotiate on behalf of a movement is one of the ways you get concessions from your enemy, and it's one of the ways you design the alternative to the enemy. Whichever one of those things you prefer, or whichever stage of struggle we're at, and it's something that gives people the opportunity to feel part of something, to be part of a project with other people. I think one of the big problems that we have, I think probably globally, but at least in the US, is that movements don't see themselves as part of necessarily a shared project. That's been the case, I think, at least since the fall of the Soviet Union, which had, of course, its own, there's like plenty to talk about whether it was the project that it meant to be and for how long it was and whatever. But certainly since the idea of like socialism being the grand sort of project of liberation, like people don't see themselves as on the same team, which limits our ability to do things in huge ways, So the party is in some ways really an idea, and people don't have the idea that they feel to be a part of, where we don't know each other, but we know we're on the same team. And we don't need to know each other because we know we're on the same team. And that's the kind of movement we need to build. We need to build the kind of movement where we're never going to know each other because that's how big it is. And I think we're very limited in that capacity. And the reason I said labor movement is because I think, again, connecting to some of the stuff from the book, like, I don't think you get anything without disrupting. And I think our capacity to disrupt things outside of our ability to withhold labor is limited. It's a lot. It's a lot to block bridges and whatever else, but it's ultimately, I think, not enough. And, the American labor movement is weak and has been under attack for many decades and is extremely small. And I don't think I don't think we're ever going to be able to either change the weather or win real concessions or transform society without working people um, bargaining over withholding their ability and time for work, which is what can actually stop the economy.
Yeah, thanks. We'll come back to the US a little bit later. Gabi just her internet shut down, so we're going to pass to Kamal. But yeah, thanks for this perspective. I'm also it's really interesting because I'm also currently reading The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, and it's actually really inspiring to read. I'm currently in the chapter on the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, and it really opens up the possibilities of what is possible to like to read and hear up on those past historical examples, especially on labor power. So João, hi, because Gabi is trying to get her internet back. So recently you've been working as a communications and media officer for an MEP in the European Parliament, Carola Rackete. So, looking at the composition of the European Parliament currently, or even current parliaments in Europe, what's the level of institutional capability that is detained currently by the movement? And do we need more? And what could prompt this institutional capability to go further?
Hello, thank you. I think, I'd like to discuss what we're talking about when we're talking about institutional capability. Because, I've been struggling with this all my life, all my political life. What does institutional mean? Because we usually only think about it in terms of elections, parliaments, municipal power, even government. But I think, especially for movements, it can and should mean much more than that. First thing, I think there's usually a lot of naivete regarding institutions because there's an abstract praise of democracy as a given. And there's an equation that democracy is every 4 or 5 years you vote, and everything in between is like the management. It's the management of the almighty electoral moment. And then I think those are institutions like, I don't know if you've seen, I have 2 TV shows which are I think they were very formative for me at least. One is Yes Minister, and the other is Veep. They actually give very good and interesting insights into the British political systems in the 70s and 80s and the pre-Trump American political system. And they give a very strong sense of the powerlessness when facing the bureaucracy and the inbuilt rules and funding and the media and the party's apparatus. And we usually don't count media as institutional power, but fuck, it's the biggest institution of world building, explaining. And I think it's also important to then understand that there's a big role in narrative institutionalism, because the institutions are codifying, and the media is codifying every political legitimacy into institutionalism, basically. So it's already sucking everything into a parliament or something to that effect. And what are these institutions built for? We all know it: to guarantee the normal functioning of capitalism, of exploitation, prioritizing profit. And even if at some moment in time they were not that, like after a revolution, they were built as something else, the radical democratic assembly, especially after when it comes after a moment when this was forbidden, like when there are dictatorships, to return the system of government to profit, they then become this normality machine. So I think at this moment, this institutionalism has given everyone the right to vote and then made that right basically meaningless or very close to meaningless. Then there's the question if all institutions are built for the same purpose. most of them, yes, for regularity and normality of capitalism. Doesn't mean normality for people's lives, and also for checking other institutions. So you might even win a parliament in a very abstract situation, but then there's a constitutional court that can block you. Or these absurd notions that the central bank needs to be independent, politically independent, or these rules on budgets and deficits, or, well, the IMF, the World Bank, and last case, the US Army. Like, all of these are institutions built for the same purpose. Obviously, when you think at this moment, when there's no imminent revolution or declared revolutionary moment happening, you can be an MP, an MEP, and be very active into trying to use that moment or that position to change discourse, to change narrative, to denounce the institution you're in, to expose its rottenness. But there is a contradiction here that a lot of people have difficulty dealing with. Can you say you are running inside and outside? That part of the movement is inside the parliament and the rest is outside. For many years, I believed this, that this could happen, and I don't anymore. That doesn't mean I think institutional capabilities are useless. Can we use, for example, institutions to legislate? My idea and my experience in the last 20 years is that basically only useless or very easily reversible changes in the distribution of accumulation are allowed. This is my experience. So, saying all of this, why do we need institutional capabilities? Well, I think movements tend to disregard institutional capabilities a bit for the very same valid reason that people in general hate institutions and the whole show around them. They see institutions as the locus of injustice, the deciders of poverty, and just a mirror of the status quo. Then there's another ideological problem, which I think we have touched this a bit here. The reason movements feel they don't have to develop or consolidate institutional capabilities is directly connected to the idea of power, which I think most movements think that it is not their problem. It is not their responsibility to have or to decide on power. So they don't feel they have to develop capabilities that are connected to power, and institutional capabilities are directly connected to power. So going back to the very tense idea that you can use institutions against what they defend, this has been tested and very frequently it fails. In most cases, you try it and you become institutionalized, co-opted, and you end up legitimizing what you were fighting against to begin with. And I think this tension grows over time. So I think you can do it and manage it in a short time. When you continue doing it for years, for decades, yeah, I don't think it can work. A movement that institutionalizes and makes institutions their core strategic focus is always, I think, at the imminent risk of not being disruptive at all, and consequently not revolutionary and blocking actually disruption. Because, yeah, do you know the name of any Bolshevik members of the Duma in 1917? There were a lot of them. You don't know the name of any. There were many like revolutionaries which were members of parliament, but you don't know what they did in parliament, what they voted for, because it was completely meaningless. That was not the strategic focus. Doesn't mean that they didn't think that there was something important happening there, otherwise they wouldn't be there, but it's not the core. That's because they used, in specific moments of time, institutions in an instrumental fashion, in short strategic moments. So I think we can develop our, oh, there's a big mosquito here, sorry. We can develop our institutional capabilities without becoming institutionalized. There's one thing, we can write legislation or write important principles that codify a vision of the world. We can write political programs. We can imagine and launch new institutions or potential institutions in other places of power. We can even get the capacity to push narratives and propose outrageous things in parliaments and get allies in parliaments, and we should. And obviously we can try to have populist champions, or we can just use it for agitation. Then I like to go into possibilities. And I will go, before I finish, to my personal experience. Elections, they are exhilarating, very exciting. I was a member of a party for many years, the Left Bloc. When I saw the apparatus of the party mobilized for an election with people in every little town organizing, etc., I thought, wow, this is like a huge revolutionary potential. For if we had this going at least half capacity all the time, we would change everything. But afterwards, it would completely dissipate, be actively demobilized. And the problem with the focus on institutional capability is that the entire apparatus of the movement will very likely become institutionally oriented. So power inside the party belongs to the elected. So the narrative capacity is oriented towards electing. Mobilization capacity is pushed towards elections. And the ideology, the political battlefield, becomes the institution. When that institution is an institution which was created to preserve capitalism above anything else, you are just going into a pitch which is full of traps, all of them against you. So nowadays, I think in most cases, especially with the current parliaments, having institutional power is mostly useful in a minor aspect, the formal one, which is getting more media coverage. But I don't think even that is a given, because all politicians are all looking at this all the time. So it's a very crowded field. Can we use institutional capabilities to build new institutions? Yes, I think we can, and to think of them and to popularize them. But being an institution at all times is walking right next to a black hole.
Thank you. Yeah, there's actually so many interesting things and like questions and also tension in here that I want I want to like cover it all. It's really being interesting. But now I'll pass the word to Gabi, who is back. Yay, got her connection back. Yeah, so to add up to this so far really interesting conversation, I wanted to ask Gabi, that you've been active in the feminist and LGBTQI plus movements in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and you know, for the past decade, the feminist movement in Argentina, in particular, you know, Ni Una Menos, but also La Marea Verde, to regularize abortion and so on, has been a big and powerful force in turning the tide and the narrative around feminism in Latin America, and you could also say, you know, in the world, in particular around the issue of feminicide and abortion. So recently, as you've also mentioned to me before this webinar, movements in Argentina have faced challenges, you know, like repression. You also mentioned struggle for mobilizing, stigmatizing, and by parts of the population as well, due to the ultra neoliberal politics of Milei. So, you know, I guess something that'll be interesting in hearing from you, and also as as you bring, you know, more the narrative capability perspective, but something that'll be interesting in hearing from you is what movement capabilities are currently lacking in your context, and which ones should the feminist movement invest in to build power, or, you know, feminist, but also a potential revolutionary movement to build power and face Milei. And are there any also movements level lessons from past years of organizing in Argentina, especially from big moments like Marea Verde or Ni Una Menos, that should be taken into account today? And yeah, how do we do that today? How can we change this narrative today, facing Milei and organizing to take power in Argentina?
Okay, thank you. easy questions like that. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I have enjoyed reading the book, as I mentioned, Matilde, earlier, because we are a bit sick of diagnosis by now. We've all become experts on why the far right is growing so much and so fast, but it seems that abundance of information and knowledge goes hand by hand with this sense of impotence that is getting really big these days as well. So it was refreshing, and it's a very interesting tool to have in hand these days. Even though we know plans have to be flexible, the idea of having a plan and steps, it seems like something we really need to have right now. So yeah, I was planning to say just a few words about the current situation. I think it's very similar to what's happening in other countries. Yeah, so we, after a big economical crisis that the previous progressive government didn't seem to be able to fix, and of course that added up to the damage that we experienced during the pandemics in terms of social inequalities getting bigger, but also mental health issues becoming a widespread thing to pay attention to. The violent speech of the far right seemed to gain a spot in the digital sphere, but also in the public sphere, and we ended up with having Milei winning the elections in December 2023. And since then, we've been experiencing a combination of a downsizing of the state, huge budget cut that meant the ending of many public programs that we, as a feminist movement, helped to build, sexual and reproductive rights, but also we are facing defunding of education and yeah, science in general, public science in general is facing a lot of problems, and this is combined with the persecution of journalists and the stigmatization and the violent attacks against activism in general. And of course, Milei's total subordination to the United States and his idea that the free market is going to fix everything will also mean that his idea of a national development program will involve foreign companies taking advantage of our natural resources, mainly, once again. So yeah, we are experiencing, just like in the Trump administration nowadays, this idea that certain terms should be banned from the public discourse, the public conversation. So inside the state, the words gender and the notion of climate change is being forbidden. So yeah, we're facing this huge backlash for us as feminists and yeah, activism in general, I would say. So it was nice to take a moment and think what we can do and with what we can learn and what capabilities that we had. We should invest time in trying to recreate them. So I think that there are like two capacities we should focus on. in my opinion, this is something that we've been discussing with colleagues and comrades, and probably I heard what João said, and so we built a movement. The feminist movement was really effective in achieving legislative advances, right, and expanding rights. Not only the feminist movement, also the human rights movement, with our history of violence during the dictatorship. The idea of politics of remembrance is a very huge topic in Argentina. So we managed to institutionalize in a way our movements, and that is always like it has always two sides, right? Because in one way you achieve to build an idea of a state that is that can be think of as an ally of the movement, but you tend to lose certain abilities in terms of mobilization. So I would say that that's not just that. We did a lot more. We also, as you mentioned, we were able to take ownership of the narrative on certain topics, especially framing the right to a legal abortion not in terms of a liberal individual right, but in terms of a public health issue, and in terms of a collective right. And this, of course, required the coordination of many different spheres, and we had like feminist comrades in the territories, and we coordinated with journalists that were also part of the feminist movement, and we had like a huge lobby activity trying to win more congresswomen to join the cause. But what now? I mean, now that we cannot be an ally of the state, on the contrary, we are the enemies of the state in terms of Milei. What do we do? So I guess that what it comes to mind is we had a huge experience during the 90s on the first neoliberal governments after the return of the democracy. We could not have the state as an ally back then. We were like we faced repression, and we faced the everyday reality of not being able to have a welfare state in any sense. So I guess that in a way it's about trying to strengthen solidarity among the different sectors that are fighting against Milei's politics and Milei's measures. And I guess that we are trying to explore different alliances to form unexpected coalitions. We are right now supporting elderly people who are fighting for their pensions, for instance, and there has been a huge movement of solidarity with them. And I guess that for us, it's about to explore new plans, like in short and medium term plans. Because I think that's another important lesson of the book. We need to have a revolutionary horizon in mind, because if you just resist, it's easy to get demoralized every day. So that really leads me to the second point I wanted to talk about, that I also think it's important to, in terms of capacities, that's patience and being kind with each other. And because we have, we know by now that what many governments, many far-right governments have in common is that they use this flood the zone, Steve Bannon manual, right? So that it's about having a bad news every day for the movement, and so it's I think that right now it is strategic to find moments of joy and of relaxation and even of celebration every now and then as a structural part of the movement and as the key aspect of the plan. So just to say one more thing, there's this saying that history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Like you can find parallel examples to learn from. And I would say that I mentioned what we learned back in the 90s during the neoliberal government, but I would also say that for us, an important lesson that we learned inside the feminist movement was the importance of international solidarity. So I guess that's something else I think we should be investing time in trying to rebuild. And the good thing is that we know that those links are still there, and it's just finding out how we reactive those connections and that international support. But yeah, I would leave it there, and then of course if there are further questions or comments on this, I'll be happy to reply. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabi. Yeah, this this has been pretty interesting. I've been taking a lot of notes actually. Yeah, maybe I do have like some things I would like to explore a bit, especially on the question of I think there's what kind of approach can we in building this ruptural revolutionary movement, what kind of approach, after all, should we have to the institutional capability? So I believe that I heard like two different perspectives. So one, more in the sense of like, yeah, we can use it to build, you know, consolidate smaller wins, and like as Yotam and Gabi were like Gabi was mentioning in the history of of her movement, but also Yotam was mentioning like that something that we would need now to, you know, be able to expand horizon and what is possible and like build on that. But then there's also but Camargo was talking about a different thing, you know, like, okay, how we should definitely not focus on building this institutional capability and looking into it as more of like a way of engaging with power, in the sense of like developing the tools that we will need in order to reach power, like writing constitution, stuff like that, which is something that I believe Occupy kind of like played with a little bit, in like that idea of creating alternative like people, institutions, you know, like alternative ways of democracy. But yeah, maybe I would yeah, open up for if there's like any questions or comments that anyone who is here like would like to pose, to either like a comment that I have, observation, like any question that you have. Also, Marianne, if you want to like jump in. Yeah, just opening it up a bit, and yeah. So whoever wants to speak, you can take the floor. You can just like put a star in the chat, or if you have your camera on, just, you know, and I'll give the word to you. Yeah, Pedro, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm trying to put my camera. Okay, it's working. So hello, and I'm really sorry that I was very late joining. I just joined when I realized that there was this webinar happening, and so I don't know. So many things that I could comment. We are really like in this edge of chaos, and this space, let's say that it opens a lot of possibilities. Some are like the institutions that João was talking about, and I can briefly share my experience of creating. I work at the local level, and of creating this climate center here in Povo de Varzim, and it was just an amazing experience. So it really made a lot of change in very short time. And just to say two things about that, last year we organized this climate assembly here with big impact, and we organized a climate demonstration with thousands of youth on the streets. And so there is room for these institutions at this time. But also from my experience, we were totally captured in the end of the last year. So then the institution is now just being used for the system, let's say. So there is also this big risk. So for now, my efforts is really like allowing people to realize the collapse that is happening and supporting them in the after collapse, let's say. Mainly reinforcing communities, like getting to know your neighbors, getting to know your local resources, creating connections between change makers, supporting change makers at the community level, talking about different kinds of democracy and all of that. So I'm really like focusing on that. So I just wanted to share the experience and maybe having some feedback from you, especially from Yotam, because I'm really curious about what's happening in the United States. And I was studying a little bit the efforts of the Labor Network for Sustainability. I was also reading some work from Murray Bookchin, I think it's his name, and all these opportunities for communalism after breakdown. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Mariana, you want to speak? You put a star in the chat, so go ahead. And then
Yeah.
I'll pass it on to the speakers. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to have you all, and it's been really nice to do this webinar. I guess I just wanted to pick up some things and maybe building on what Pedro just said. That is when you have, we are talking now more around institutional capability, but any of them, right? If it's a group that is putting a lot of efforts in disruptive capability or in narrative capability, if you kind of lose the focus of what is the aim that you have, or if that's not like a very clear, it's always going to be in some place or another co-opted, right? In a sense that the capabilities that we have are more a tool than the end goal. And most of the times we end up to forget that. So groups that are usually very strong on disruptive capability end up doing a lot of disruption without knowing exactly what they are doing that and strategizing around that, as Jota started by saying. And the same thing with institutional, right? I think like that kind of loop of you just carry on doing that because that's something that you're good at, but you forgot to what, like why are you using that capability for? So that's a very important part of it, right? And of course, the institutional one is the one that is more easily co-opted by the more mainstream institutions then. So that's one thing that I was thinking about, this part of like how can we, and and the fact that we are naming it has a capability also supports us cognitively to think about that, right? It's a capability that we have. It's not the end goal that we have, right? So like we have this capability of disruption, but it's not that what we're going to do is disruption by itself or institutional or and so on and so on. So like what are you using for? And I guess that's a part of it. Another thing that I was thinking, it's more around so what the two things that were said in one way or another from the different speakers about how it can go wrong. So for example with Yotam, I think that's how you said your name, sorry if I'm saying wrong. I was, when you were talking, I was really thinking about how like one of the issues that we have with the ruptural theory of change and like a transformative strategy is that usually groups think that ruptural means disruptive. And a lot of and so you kind of end up only putting efforts, so like the movement that is very small kind of end up like putting all the efforts only in the disruptive capability, and you end up having the rest of the capabilities, so that like goes to a place where it loses the meaning of what are you doing that, right? And the focus, why are you doing that? And there was some part of what you were saying that it reminded me of that, and the importance is of understanding that disruption is one of the capabilities that ruptural movement need to have, but not the only one, right? And I was thinking a little bit around like the institutional part, and of course like the what Camargo brought, and I guess that I agree with a lot of the things that Camargo said. Maybe just adding that in the end, I see like the institutional capability has a. So how can we create infrastructures, right? Like what are the infrastructures that we can create? And you were saying, like media is infrastructure, like you're talking about so many different things, because usually when we're talking about infrastructure, we think more in terms of like, when we're talking about institutional, we think more in terms of like the parliament or the laws and stuff like that, right? But there are so many infrastructure that is needed and that sustain the system currently. And how are you able to actually create infrastructures, hold infrastructure existing, and how are you able to and how people perceive or understand that if you were doing that, they can trust that you are able to do it actually, right? So that's part of the things that usually society blames us for, right? They say, you have some ideals, but actually you don't have the capability to put them on practice, like in terms of like practical knowledge of how to implement stuff and so on and so on, and policy knowledge and stuff like that, right? I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying that that's also because usually the institutional capability that they see is much more on the, on the system in itself. And when we try to have it for our own, it's very difficult to keep it, right? So we are not being able to have that. So people don't see that we have that capability at all, right? So that's something that is interesting in my perspective. And the last thing, and maybe picking up just a little bit what Gabi was saying, I guess that's something that for me, it was very interesting on studying the capabilities, was to understand there are the prefigurative capability and the resilience capability that are very important, right? But I think that's something that was very curious for me, was to understand that when you have very good narrative disruption and institutional capability, you are able to do prefigurative and you're able to do resilience through those three, right? So like if you're able to set the narrative, you're able to much more easily to be resilient and to have, like to put prefigurative in what we're doing. The same with institutional and the same with with the institutional narrative and disruptive. Sorry. So I think that's very interesting, is to understand when do you need to focus only on this part more in terms of like prefigurative resilience, or when do you need to, like use the narrative and the institutional and the disruptive to be able to also to have those more supportive capabilities. And that was something that I have been thinking a lot also, and I think it's very interesting. So yeah, so these are my takes on what have been said, and carry on. And yeah, it was very nice. Back to you, Matilde.
Yeah, so before seeing if there's like other comments and so on, I'm just gonna give some space to react. I don't know if like Yotam or Gabi or Camargue, if you want to like, pick up something that was said either like on the other people's intervention, or like now if there's something that you want to put on further. So I'm just gonna give that space.
I'm happy to jump in. I see that we don't have a lot of time, and I think that's so I'll try to be quick. I think that if we, had another 3 hours and were able to talk about the details of all of this, I think we would get somewhere really interesting. And also I think we'd probably agree much more than it might sound like I don't know that we sound like we disagree in any big way, but I think especially if there is some difference between João, you and I, maybe in terms of how we might relate to institutions or to the system or whatever. I don't know how apparent that is or how much you feel it, but well, just I think it's I'm just actually curious and fascinated, and I think so much of it has to do with like time and place and moment and what the movement. I think the Bolshevik example is a really fascinating one. I don't the history of it, but in some ways I'm like, you bring it as an example of maybe this part of the work is irrelevant, and maybe I hear in you the sort of like openness and curiosity. So this is not, I'm not picking a fight, but I also in another way it's like maybe this is exactly a great example of how the things work together. Like it's maybe the Bolsheviks in parliament were passing legislation that made it easier for the movement to function, or maybe their being in parliament made them a more trustworthy actor for the public to follow them, or maybe it bought them time, or maybe who knows what the fuck happened, and you might know the answer to those questions. But I think where I think there's just a lot of like, well, there's a difference between trying to seek concessions from the system and trying to enter the system. And there is also a difference. I think that it also just to me raises the question of like, what's the movement? What is it? What are we talking about when we say the movement? Because of course, different actors are going to play different roles. So it's like in this context here, is Bernie part of the movement? There's a certain view of the movement that says, of course not. This is not a, revolutionary socialist, whatever. There's another view of this that says this is what movements are. They are diverse. They have different tendencies inside them. What doesn't have different tendencies is the party inside the movement, or the cadre organization that guides the whatever, or but in reality, people are going to play those roles. There are going to be populist politicians, and we need them. And there are going to be populist parties, and we need them. And in fact, the state of the movement, at least here, is that we don't have them. And so it is logical and normal for some people in the movement to say, this is a prerequisite to getting to the stage of struggle that can lead anywhere good. So I will go into that. I will go into parliament or whatever, with all of the traps that exist in that, and all of the reality that most of these strategies on their own and even together tend not to work. Like most of the time we lose, so it's like there aren't really a lot of good case studies in general of any of it. But for sure, none of these capabilities work on their own. There's no such thing as just disruption from outside that gets taken seriously by the opponent, and then you get shit for that. If you don't have the institutional capacity to take concessions from your opponent and begin to govern, you ain't gonna get shit. And disruption is annoying, and then it ends. And in the same way as everybody's already saying, like when you join into the system's infrastructure and try to change it from there, you will get sucked into it if there isn't a different counterweight that pulls in the other direction. And a story is just a story. It's not power. And so so anyway, there's going to have to be some. I think the interesting question for me is, what's the movement and who decides who's in it and who's not, and what's a rupture? Is it a moment or is it a decades-long process of small ruptures? And I don't know. I'm sort of fascinated by it. Anyway, and I also wanted to say, I've already spoken, I think, to João, the ways that I think what you're saying is compelling. And Gabi, I'll just say, like, I think the idea that you're naming about vision needing to sort of anchor the whole thing is right. And I think that's what I was getting at when I was talking about party, where there's lots of things that parties do. They have different kinds of like mechanisms or whatever, but really the thing that's so missing is an idea that we all think we're a part of, even though the idea really isn't any different from for us, I think probably is not that different from some generations ago, but the sense that you're part of a shared project with people is really a prerequisite to building a movement that's powerful.
Yeah, thanks. I was also, and I'll just say this and then I'll see if there's any other interventions and I'll come back to João and then we'll start slowly try to wrap it up. But I was also just now reflecting how actually Gabi was saying that like we are sick of diagnosis. Everyone is like so good at diagnosing, right? Like how the far right came so far. And I was actually reflecting how currently you have a movement of far right who has these three main capabilities like perfectly articulated. You have like people on the streets. You have some leverage of disruptive capability. You have definitely a lot of institutional capability, and you have a lot of narrative capability. And I think Gabi was saying like how when you are resisting, you can't really go a lot further, like when you are always like opposing what's happening and not like having a big vision for taking it all over, like for winning it all, like in a more attack and less like defense. So, just a reflection that I was thinking like, well, wow, the far right actually has this pretty movement capabilities pretty much figured, like a lot better figured out than the left, like currently. Just a reflection. And I'll just want to see if there's anyone who, before passing to João, any other question, comment from the people who are here. No? So I'll pass to João and I'll just get my charger. You'll just see me off camera for like a couple of seconds, but João, go ahead. I'm listening. Oh, no, maybe no, go, and then I'll pass to Gabi to wrap it up. Yeah, go.
Yeah. Well, my intervention was, despite my criticism, in favor of developing institutional capabilities. I do have a preference of I think the most important outcome of those capabilities is producing thought of new institutions, new laws, new ways of seeing the world. Although I understand that at some moments it is possible to extract some concessions. But actually, I think it's important to demand things which are completely incompatible with the systems, just to create a crash in the system. I think that's what the far right is doing in some places, to great effect, both institutional and narrative. And about the Bolsheviks, they were betting on all things at the same time. In less than 1 year, they went from robbing banks and being in a clandestine organization to entering the Duma, becoming a mass organization with Soviets, trade unions, newspapers. And it went through the Soviet way, but it could have gone. I think they were very flexible on, if this road is blocked, we go that way, and it worked. But they were developing. They had a coordination. that was actually looking at, okay, this is going well, that's not going well. There was also institutional capability, not in institutions, namely in Soviets, in developing Soviets, developing assemblies, organizing trade unions, and obviously a lot of clandestine work that was all capability. And some of it was institutional, like what are the laws that will codify the new world we are proposing. Yeah. So I am in favor of developing institutional capabilities. I am not in favor of getting swallowed by mirages.
Thanks. And I'll pass on to Gabi, and then we can wrap it up. Go ahead, Gabi.
Just to say that I would love to stay for 3 hours, like Yotam said, discussing these things. I just wanted to say one quick thing on the role of prefigurative capabilities. I think that we still are good. We can do better than the far right. I don't think they are proposing an idea of future that is either sustainable or nice. Yes, I think that they, at least in Argentina, but I would say that Brazil is the same, was the same with Bolsonaro, without finding new enemies to use as scapegoats, and without inviting people to return to nostalgic supposed past that is going to redeem redeem the present. They're not that good. So I guess that for us, once we enter the institution, once we got inside as a movement, I think that we started to get like too pragmatic, to realpolitik kind of mindset. So I think that it's useful not to forget that we are still good in the business of imagining better futures for us all. So it's something that we need to spend a little time thinking about, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you for this conversation. Truly, it has been really interesting, and has given me things to think about, and lessons to think about that you all brought. Truly, I'm inspired. So thanks for this. Thanks for this conversation. Unfortunately, we have to end it now. But maybe just a couple of more practical things. So yeah, you've at least some of you have read the book, and the idea is that this book creates and provokes the much needed discussion on, what Yotam was saying, what is the movement and where the fuck is it, and how are we going to build it? And it's, proposing that we invest in rupture as our grand strategy, and gives a few steps on how we could build possibly that movement of rupture together, taking into account also what Gabi was saying, reviving international solidarity, not only solidarity, but also coordination. And the idea is that this book is it was written and it's out and people can buy it, but the idea is to actually apply it and to become more, to start this conversation, to have the discussions, and to have, it's a recruitment tool for an implementation of the propositions of the book that we need to discuss together as well, because there's so much to go through together. It gives a proposal, but there's still so much that we need to figure it out. So, just leaving that invitation and that door open, these webinars are a way of beginning that discussion, you know, like with people who bring interesting backgrounds, like who bring interesting perspectives. But just leaving the door open for that conversation, for that deeper conversation. There's a newsletter like on the website that maybe I'll invite you to join in, because there it's where we're like giving the news on like what's going on. And there has been already some application phases going on. So there has been like workshops with movements in several countries, and there are other trips planned. And of course, like it's also something that we want to implement at a broader and more internationally coordinated level. So I'll just, you know, leave the door open for that and invite you folks to enter the newsletter as a way of like, you know, getting the information and like getting what's going on. There's also like an email address, but you also have like my contact, and at least the Gabi and Yotam, and of course Camargo. But for the other people who are here on this webinar, there's also contact in the website. And yeah, I don't know if Maria, you want to add something on this part, like specifically more on implementation / practical things, something. Yeah. Great. Oh, there's also like the website, which has some articles, either like on applying all in, and like basically what we have been discussing here, but like written form, let's say. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. We'll put this on YouTube soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Bye, everybody.